Hello.
Hi, Penny.
Hi.
Thanks very much for being here. There's some water there, just in case you're hot.
Do I look like I need it?
No, not yet. No, don't. Already it's got tense. Come on, this is small talk. Come on, that'll be fine. I think most people here will be familiar with the magazine. But for anyone who doesn't know the Gentlewoman, how would you personally, as the editor-in-chief, sum up what it tries to do as a publication?
It's a biannual women's magazine. It's 5 years old, so we're working on our 10th issue at the moment. It was conceived of as an answer to women's publishing as we saw it when we started in 2009. The first one came out in 2010, but we launched during recession, and it felt like there was nothing to lose. And we came from a already very respected stable of publications that I'm not responsible for. I work for two extremely entrepreneurial, extremely clever Dutch guys, Gert Jonkers and Job van Bennekom. And, you know, I inherited an incredibly, as you said, very respected context, and my job was just not to muck it up and make a woman's version of what was a very well-respected man's personality-centred publication. So I guess personally, because I used to work in the Women's Library a long time ago, which was the Fawcett Library, literally, the oldest collection of women's history in the world. So I didn't want to make the spare rib. When I say that, I didn't want to make, great if I'd made the spare rib the publication, but I didn't want to do the girls' sidekick publication. Could have been called Fantastic Woman. And it was very important to us that it wasn't. So what the brief and what the ambition is to create a new voice, I guess, in an extremely saturated market full of publications devoted to creativity and often in response to digital culture had turned into aggregators. So we wanted to make something that was extremely edited, very opinionated, a single viewpoint, periodical, timely, incredibly ambitious for what it was. So if that's not a long answer to a very short question.
And so, I mean, you used the phrase there, which was an answer to women's publishing. And so those things that you'd identified as what you wanted to do, what was it when you surveyed the competitors? And like you say, it is a very saturated market. What was not being provided by them, did you feel? What was the gap?
Well, I'd be being slightly disingenuous to say that we did lots of market research and we sat and looked at lots of magazines and kind of decided what we didn't want to be. And then that's a very important part of the way that we work, our company works, is we're very defined by what we're not. So we didn't kind of bring in loads of commercial publications. But that said, it's an organization, unlike a lot of style culture publishing, online and print, that I'd been experienced previously. We're not really a magazine that's got two adults, making the money and a load of interns doing the work. It's a very adult, ambitious, very experienced, really people that really care and they really know the subject and they know about magazines. So when I say we didn't do market research, it's in our, I don't say I know every single magazine, but I came from magazine research. That's what I did when I was at the Royal College. And when I was at the Women's Library, I knew about all the sort of 17th and 18th century magazines. I mean, for goodness sake, the Gentlewoman did exist in the 19th century. It was a publication then, and that's where the word came from. So that said, what did we want to be? We wanted to represent brilliant, purposeful, clever, sexy women and not sexualize them, which is a very simple ambition, but strangely there's not very much evidence of it in the market. And we didn't want to make a magazine for dumb consumers and speak to them like they're idiots and tell them what they should be buying. We wanted to feel like our subjects had arrived. We weren't selling them in like product. And that so have our readers. We do readers events and I meet people that know way more about the women that we represent than I do. And I like that idea that we're all shoulder to shoulder. I mean, I know I'm sitting here on a stage, but when we do events, I like to be behind the counter at the bookshop wrapping the magazines for people, because then they'll come and say, you know what, you should be doing this hedge funder or this amazing woman horse breeder, or I know this horticulturalist. And that's when I'm like, right, that's a good idea, and I much prefer that kind of editorial context and that dynamic. And that's the way we work together in the company. We're not a huge organisation, but you know, it's fast and it is exciting. It is.
You mentioned then that you're going into the 10th issue of the magazine. So, and we met just, you know, when we were talking about this talk, and you said, you know, people ask you that first question an awful lot. What does the gentleman do? What's his ambition?
I was being a diva, was I? Saying, don't ask me the beginnings question. But, okay.
But you did point out that, you know, over 10 issues, some things change and some things have evolved. So what do you think, you know, from that starting point, from those early conversations with Hurt and Yop, what is different now, going into its 10th issue?
Do you mean describing the issue, or do you mean the context in which we're working?
I think the context in which you're working, yeah. I mean, people must have many more expectations of you now. You know, you can't be quite as free as maybe you were once.
Yeah, the standards get higher. We're not allowed to repeat ourselves amongst ourselves. Of course, there's some things that could be described as formats, but we don't create a grid and just fill it with stuff and say, okay, where's the shoe story of this issue? That's the kind of magazine we don't want to be. You know, we would join a big... We're an independent publishing company. We'd join an enormous... We'd have a big backer if we wanted to work in that way. And we work very... you know, we spend a month in production, which is insane by the standards of most magazines. It's, you know, I spend a month away at Fashion Week and I spend a month in, you know, I just go underground for a third of the year. So, you know, it's a huge commitment to it. What is different, though, you're saying? I'd say that the environment is a lot more buoyant commercially again. I don't know whether that's necessarily sustainable. Yeah, people have really high standards of the magazine. They want to know who's on the cover next, what colour is it going to be. You know, those are personal things. But you know, the magazine got bigger physically and metaphysically, and people. My own experience of it is that the people that I talk to about it really know it. You know, my God, they don't just say, "Oh, you know, great issue." You know, which is the kind of that's what happens on the front row. I was like, love your work. You know, of course, you assume they've never seen it, and then they say, that caption in the you know, like, wow. You feel very aware of people's familiarity with it. And that's something, for all that it was a kind of very lauded, first of its kind website like Show Studio, I never got anything like that. People almost get emotional about women's publications, and they really tell you what they like and they don't like, and it's very passionate. So that's the kind of, in terms of the readership, in terms of the actual production of the magazine, you know, because we're literally, I think have we doubled in size? Well, we have doubled in page sizes. So, and you know, our readership has gone, we started off at 72,000, rather cocksure, we thought, because that was Fantastic Man's circulation. And we're now at 98,000. I mean, we're distributed by Comag. It's, you know, you know, we're told we're the best for performing women's title of our kind, the pressure. But, you know, the actual literal work is in trying to work out how to expand the front section without it becoming a sea of cynical shopping pages and kind of new shoes kind of exposés, and to not turn, as many other, certainly monthly magazines are currently doing, to try and create their formats that are led by online, so that the words become truncated and like the writer is absent somehow. Don't get me started on that. I'm just trying to self-edit. And to feel that the women are still, you know, work on the photography, so the women are still very present in them, and they're close to the picture plane, and you hear the sound of their voices. So whilst expanding, not to lose the very reason that you started that kind of photography. I think what you're looking at the moment is every single woman we've ever photographed nearly backwards. So it's like 9th issue going backwards. Thank you for Veronica for a very ambitious digital project realised in a very short period of time. And then to be more ambitious with the fashion. You know, we knew we wanted to start with from quite a dry, yeah, you're going from fabulous to dry as you watch. A sort of dry fashion, sartorial piles of clothes, forensic still life, etc. To make sure that we made a very sartorial. The last thing we wanted to be was you know, 15-year-old models spread-eagled on hotel beds with giant handbags. You know, we could make the opposite of that. So in fact, we started very formal, and I think that we're starting to learn how to make women sexy whilst never compromising them in that way. And that's actually an extremely difficult balance. I mean, any fool can make a 15-year-old model look fabulous in catwalk top to toe looks. What about a 40-year-old woman who's an amazing businesswoman that probably isn't a sample size? How do you make her look just as fabulous? It's a much harder task. And we've got a fantastic fashion director, Angela. She did me a lot of favours, Angela. You know, and our art directors, Jop and Veronica Ditting, who's with us, you know, have a hard job working with photographers to make them understand what we absolutely do not want. You know, so sorry, I overshoot your question.
No, there's just something I want to pick up on. You mentioned the pressure that, you know, people coming up to you and saying, oh, you know, I love what you do and I'm really passionate about it, but I didn't.
Oh, I mean, it's not that much pressure. That's quite nice.
But I was going to say, in the actual practicalities of working on the magazine, do you have to put that out of your mind? Because actually, that's too much pressure, isn't it? If you've got all those voices going around about people who are going to complain about the captions or the crops or all these things, do you have to be much more single-minded than that when you're putting the actual magazine together?
Well, I should be, yes. But it's actually, that's not really... I'm thinking about not letting that kind of readership down, not making bad mistakes about the way a woman seems or sounds, and not compromising. You know, if I've talked some extraordinary scientist into being in a women's magazine, a very difficult task, I can tell you, because they're really worried about being made a fool of, being made to wear clothes that they'd never wear, or big, you know, pull quotes with things that they've taken out of context that make them sound really cheap to their, you know, they've really had to work hard to be that woman in that environment and in that field, and if we trip them up, you know, and make them seem like they're stupid and they're in a, you know, women's magazine, I do myself a disservice and them. But, you know, actually, if I'm going to be totally honest with you, when I first started, I was in such awe of the people that I was working with. I was just worried about being good enough. So actually, it was just, you know, I work with brilliant journalists and writers that are, you know, people that I never thought I would work with, and it's just making sure that everything gets better. So actually, it's a self-imposed pressure, you know, and, you know, I maybe should be sitting here saying, you know, yeah, of course, you know, but actually, it's just about making sure that everything is as good as it possibly can be, and things get rewritten, and top photographers get asked to reshoot, and it's mortifying and very difficult. But it's, you know, it has to be worth it. You know, it's an obscenity to make a bad magazine. They squander lots of resources. You know, they can make so many dreadful mistakes and statements, and they've got such responsibility to representing women, especially women who, you know, fought really hard to be who they are in their fields, etc. So, you know, it's about upholding, you know, all those relationships. You know, I mean, it's very nice as well. You know, it's great fun, and I got a great deal of pleasure about it, but I don't take it lightly, I suppose, is what I'm trying to say.
And so you touched on the content selection there, and how, you know, you don't want to have the shoe story, and you don't want to do the things that other people are doing. I think anyone who's...
Go on, sorry.
Anyone who's
There's nothing wrong with shoes, just, you know.
No, but I use shoes often. But what I mean... I'm interested, though, in the sense of, you know, this content selection, you know, these stories that you decide you want to tell. And anyone who's picked up a copy of the magazine will know there are things in there that are just, you know, things that you'd never have thought you were interested in, maybe, and you are. How does that work? How does that work practically? That process of trying to, you know, deciding who and what is actually going to go in this magazine.
Okay, I'll try and make that quick. So there's a 60, 80-page, well-thumbed list of people that I want, and, you know, some of which I'll never get, and some of whom hopefully I will. So that goes round and round and round. That gets edited into a shorter version where, you know, we go into kind of 4-hour meetings, kind of, you know, browbeating over whether it should be, let me think of people that we haven't done in case I give away something about the next issue, whether it should be Yoko Ono or Jenny Holzer or should it be Beyonce, you know. So there's that kind of meeting. And then, of course, we're, you know, I'm with the deputy editor Caroline Roux, and our colleagues come over from Amsterdam, and it's just as, it's, you know, it's very intense. In constant conversation, of course, with PRs in the industry, because we're not a fashion-centred magazine. We're not a fashion magazine. We're a women's magazine, but we've got very strong fashion-facing aspect of what we do, so that all happens. But I think that what I was talking about trying to expand the magazine physically, we started with a very personality-centred formula. You had these, what I call the modernisms, well, we call the modernisms at the start, which are these Q&A, very intimate, warm discussions with women to try and replicate female conversations, which I think are really different from conversations that happen when men are around. And then we had big, giant New Yorker style, maybe not New Yorker, one day, New Yorker profile in the centre, 4,000 words, big, meaty. But that was a lot of reading, and it was very bookish, and that was a lot to ask. So now we've put in pieces that are more formatty and objecty and smaller, like there's this thing called the Modern Details. All the section at the front is about modernity and about the idea about, okay, we know what the traditional genres of women's publishing are: beauty, hair, entertaining, la la la. But what would be the modern spin on that? How do the women that we know and we go to dinner with actually think about hairdressing? Or what do they think about astrology? Or do you consult a psychic? So that thematically, that's all there, but it's done in quite a dry, not academic, because I've forgotten more than I knew about academia when I was one, but it's a very earnest, deadpan kind of mode of approach. So let me give an example. Our Modern Details are just 400-word pieces about modern women and how they conduct their lives, and kind of sort of things like, oh, so you wear a cufflink, do you? That kind of thing, that kind of female conversation, like folding coat hanger in the last issue, about how I get incensed by people putting my coat on a peg and then getting the hump in an expensive jacket. So about how you might hang up your coat. Those things, they almost sound arcane and a little bit etiquette manually, but we're trying to devise a new way to talk about that, really to talk about women and their conversations, but through an object. So it's always genre-centred, if I'm not being too detailed, but that's kind of how it happens. And of course, Veronica and I will be sitting going, do people eat trifle? Those are truly those are the kinds of conversations that we'll be sitting having in a really argumentative way. That's the truth of it.
And what about then, you mentioned the discussions about which people, who you were going to profile, which women you were going to actually, feature in the magazine. I'm really interested, how do those names get suggested? Like you say, you've got a list, but how do you decide between a Beyonce and an Angela Lansbury, or,
Well, given that they actually followed in succession, I think it's important that, with profiles, naturally, the people who've got the great stories are the ones who've had 2 careers, had the divorce, had the sex change. There's just a lot to talk about, and that it's a great story. And naturally, everybody wants to do an Adele, but she's 21. Well, she was when we interviewed her. And, it's an interesting, timely story. But as the magazine has gone on, I've started to realise that people treat them like books. They come back to me and they're still talking about the Inez profile that I did for issue 2 in 2010, as if it's still current somehow. So I do have a responsibility to make sure that those things aren't just like the latest, but they are something we're not going to look back 2 years later and sort of think, ideas for that, or Dazed and Confused is for that kind of look who now. I kind of have to think about it existing in time. So for covers, of course, they're the icons. But if we did that, we could be very yesteryear, and we could also imply to young women that they never could be that now. So I feel that it's important that there's a kind of push and pull, and that there's youth and there's experience, and there's conventional beauty, and there's surprises, and you want humour, you want the camp option, you want the crazy option, you want the bad taste option. I need to feel that we're constantly testing, and we don't get kind of whatever success that we are currently enjoying, and a lot of young magazines do. I'm not saying that but you don't get kind of carried away with yourself and just become another Vogue, because Vogue does what they do very well, arguably different Vogues more than others. But I don't want us to be that. And then at the other end of things, like Marion, I'm not remotely interested in cool. I'm interested in warmth, and it's an important distinction, for me.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the covers, and I wanted to come to those, but let's cover that now. I mean, most people will be familiar. Let's take particularly the Beyonce cover, which I think is certainly the one I most remember kind of coming into the studio.
Well, you'd think so, wouldn't you? I wanted to also thank your event partner. I was at my...
This isn't set up, by the way, I'll be honest.
No, but, for all the people that I've worked with, and I have had the opportunity of working, really privileged to work with a lot with Alexander McQueen and Nick Knight and Peter Saville and Bjork and all those kinds of people. And the one thing my brother is most proud of me, I was at his 40th birthday the other night and he spent at least 20 minutes with a frame grab on a phone showing all of his friends that my name was on the front of WeTransfer. And literally, it is the thing that he is most proud. So thank you, WeTransfer, for explaining why I'm never at family events and I'm always away in production. He now knows. Thank you. Sorry.
That's great, no.
Yeah. Sorry, Kyle.
So Beyonce. Yeah, you had the amazing photo. I think that was Alistair McClellan, wasn't it? Who took the Beyonce
Correct, yeah,
portrait.
and we've got a very strong working relationship with him.
And once you've got that portrait, it's an incredible picture. Once you've got that, how many iterations of the colour goes it through? I know your art director's here, she might be able to tell us. But
the colour happens quite towards the end, in the sense that we don't work with the grid, so the assets all have to be in. And obviously with someone like Beyonce apart, often we don't decide who's on the cover till the very end, because you've got to see the assets. I know that the relationship with the industry is changing where, before you even say, are they available on that date? Like, have we got quote approval? Have we got image approval? Are we on the cover? All of the kind of demands are kind of before you say, can we spend more than an hour with her? Or, so the colour happens in context with the black and white. And the interesting thing with the colour is that sometimes we can have an image in mind. For instance, this kind of eau de Nil, maybe slightly more yellow. Well, the Pantone colours often get mixed at the printers. I think we're one of the most annoying companies to our printers, poor printers. But you can think that Angela Lansbury is going to look great with a kind of bright orange or something like that. But when it happens, you suddenly realise that makes her, because of her age, that makes her look like a Warhol and you think she's dead. It's very interesting to see what happens with the colours. So yeah, there's a lot of, people, long before our magazine's out, everyone's going, is it brown, Penny? And I'm looking on Twitter thinking, what are they talking about? And I'm like, of course, it's the cover.
Okay. You touched there, and again, it's something we're going to come to shortly, but let's deal with it now. You talked about the relationship with the industry, and obviously I think, I don't want to get into the commercial pressures of print and of doing a magazine. I think
fine.
Most people are kind of aware of those probably who are here today, but how does the Gentlewoman, in particular, approach these challenges around PR's expectations, around advertising, and how do you try and be different if you do?
One of the things I find most amazing about being in fashion is the industry and is the politics of it. And, of course we're shaped by a lot of the demands and the expectations, but I don't want to sit here and say we're art and we avoid commerce. We're a commercial magazine, and fashion at its best is a commercial product. That's what makes... That is one metric of success in fashion, is whether people want to buy your clothes, and I don't have a problem with that at all. Yet it is very demanding. Post 2001, the industry has really changed. It gave the industry a chance to recalibrate to its advantage and ask for different things from magazines and websites, which was what I started working at Show Studio in 2001. Literally the week I started was when the Twin Towers went down, and everything changed. But that's the landscape that I know. And even when I was studying magazines, I wasn't sitting studying magazines and talking about the kind of everlasting truth and beauty of Alexei Brodovich. I was interested in Thatcherism and what changed with the printing industries and what happened when Eddie Shah launched Today and completely changed publishing and turned it started digital publishing. That is so exciting to me, and I don't try to avoid it. I mean, it completely colours what we do. But at the same time, we don't look like we have a particularly commercial magazine by a lot of advertiser standards, and yet we're incredibly successful with advertising. So I just don't think it's necessary to try and, circle each other like pigeons. Just have a frank conversation. So
what about then those expectations when a PR says, well, have I got quote approval? Can I see the piece? Can we choose that, we want X amount of pages? Do you engage with those kind of conversations at all, or is that not for the Gentlewoman?
I would be being disingenuous to say that I haven't had those conversations, but like the first try is no, 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 and then we'll see. No, it's a world of pain trying to give people quote approval. Who wouldn't want to change what they'd said once they saw it written down? So, but I think that we are an incredibly partisan collaborator. We want women to look amazing. We don't want to make them sound stupid. I'm not a broadsheet where I might equally be doing Sarah Palin as much as Yoko Ono. It says the Gentlewoman over the door. Sarah Palin's not getting in. So I'm not trying to, so I'm not going to try and hoist her with her own petard. You know, I want these people, I'll correct their grammar, sure. I don't want them, you know, if I saw what I'm saying just now written down, I'd be horrified. Nobody sounds as great as they think they do they? So, quote approval, no, because and also it undermines your writers. And frankly, it's important to me that we get as good writers as we possibly can. There's so few of them that can work at that level, and you know that you have to really look after those people, and especially you know when we're not Condé Nast, we can't offer American writers rates, you know. So when we've got people working from the New Yorker for us, and we have this issue, then I'm going to really support them, and I'm not going to say that we're going to send their copy to a New York PR publicist and let them take it apart. Absolutely not. Mm-hmm. And if somebody did that to me, I wouldn't write for them again. Mm-hmm.
You mentioned right at the beginning, obviously, that Gentlewoman came out of Fantastic Man, out of Job and Hurt and their stable over in Amsterdam. I'm really interested to know about the relationship that you have with those guys, how that's changed, but particularly as a starting point maybe, you said that the obvious thing might have been for the Gentlewoman to be called Fantastic Woman. That would have made, you know, would have been quite a predictable thing to have happened. It didn't. I'm interested from a design point of view, from an aesthetic point of view, how much was borrowed from Fantastic Man, or how much did yourself and Veronica start with a blank slate and just take it from there?
Okay, 2 questions.
There's about 4 in there, okay, I think, so I'm sorry about that.
Okay, my relationship with my bosses in front of 800 tweeting delegates. Can we do that 1 second? First one, how much the personality-centered conceit, the structure of profiles, etc., a very candid mode of photography, a strong, I should explain, we do shoot colour now and then, but a strong affection for black and white photography, etc., a love of print and paper and an ambition to make excellent magazines. That all came from Fantastic Man. But there were some important things to change. Fantastic Man has a kind of very clever mode of talking to men, a little bit like a 1950s woman's magazine. You know, that's the joke. It's like, you may consider your hair very tall, but however, you know, the way that women have often been spoken to, and that's really funny when it's being spoken to Mr. Ford or, you know, Mr. Cruise. Not that they've done Tom Cruise, but that was the one I could think of. However, if I start speaking to women like that, that's the way that they remember that their mothers were spoken to before feminism. They don't want to hear that. So I had to work on the tone a lot. And then I think as Veronica and I have become much more autonomous with our team, etc. You know, there's been a lot of kind of a woman's perspective in there. There was a pilot of Gentlewoman inside the 10th issue of Fantastic Man with Ewan McGregor on the cover. And there was a, you know, I didn't work on that, although I was in conversation with them. And I think there's a lot of difference between what we did in the first issue and that one, because it was 2, you know, gay men making what they thought a women's magazine would be, having spoken to me. And, you know, it's not wildly different, but the differences are important. Yeah, you asked me which bits have changed. It's a very different magazine, but it's recognisable. You know, the typefaces are different, but you know, it has the same ambition, and we're not desperate to distance ourselves from it. We'll definitely repurpose things that they've done, etc. You know, we do lists, they do lists. Sometimes they borrow our modernisms. My relationship with my bosses.
If you could not tweet the next 2 minutes, that would be really helpful.
No, they can take it. So, maybe best answered by an anecdote. It's not media training, but so it actually took us about 2 years to work together. They asked me, and I thought about it, and I took another job, and got a big roasting on the phone from Job, and actually then discovered I should have taken that job, and I had to take him to lunch and go, are you still interested? So it didn't happen immediately. In fact, I didn't go straight from Gentlewoman to Fantastic Man. I went back to academia and worked in research for a bit, and then went to them. And I think, if I'm very honest, although I've lied about this and kind of come up with lots of different reasons that I didn't take that job, you know, I'd worked with 2 extremely accomplished, brilliant, very well respected, older guys before. I'd worked for Nick Knight and Peter Saville. And I think I was nervous about, you know, from when I was very young. I was a young academic when I first started working for Nick, and I was doing my PhD in PhD research, the uncompleted PhD, I should be careful taking. But I didn't want to be Peggy Olson again to Roger Sterling and Don Draper. And I wasn't sure if that might have been the context that I was getting into, and it could well have been, because they're brilliant. They're full of ideas and so articulate and so knowledgeable, and just they have the right answers. You know, they're great. And to become the third spoke, but third point in the triangle between two people who've been working together for 10 years and already don't speak full sentences anymore because they know when they, like, you know, that kind of relationship that we all have in our creative, to come in and force two Dutch-speaking people to externalize those thoughts in English and explain to me why not. I was going to have to be the annoying little sister, and I wasn't sure if, you know, I wanted that again. Should I go off and be doing my own research project? But the actual truth of it is, it was never like that. And all credit to them. You know, they are really direct people, and, you know, they'll pick up something and say, well, that's terrible. I mean, it's like, you know, it's Dutch people are really direct, and even for a Scottish person who's pretty direct, it was, you know, I actually had medical reaction to it to begin with. My arms were burning in the first 2 months, and my doctor told me it was cortisol coming out of my skin or something, just from the kind of stress of it, learning how to deal with that. But they're Europeans is the difference. I came from the civil service, you know, where your desk got bigger as you got more senior, and, you know, that there was such a chain of command that I kind of continued to work a little bit when I was working for Peter and Nick, a bit like a museum employee where I was very reverential. And I was actually very reverential to contributors. I was very involved in commissioning, but I was very respectful of what came in, and I didn't change text and things. Suddenly work with them, and everything gets rewritten, and it's our perspective or no perspective, but it's extremely collegiate and really respectful. And here I am representing our magazine. It's not them, you know. It's been an absolute joy. It's not easy, but the political and the respect dynamics turned out to be far more important than anything that I could have imagined, and I couldn't have known that until I worked with them. So a very full answer, and probably much more than you ever wanted to know about my working relationships, but there you are, I answered it.
Well, what's great is that Lerna and Sander, who are on the who are Dutch, started laughing during that as well. So that's
well, they're old friends of Gert and Jop's. They know more about it than I do.
So this is going straight back to them then. That's, yeah.
They know it.
Editing a magazine, and particularly a fashion magazine, obviously, a women's magazine with a fashion bent, requires you to play various roles, kind of, you know, the editorial, the commercial, and like you said, for a month every year, quite a public role at fashion shows, etc.
Yeah, it does.
How do you balance those different expectations? How do you wear those different hats, if you like?
Well, when I finished at Show Studio, I must have done something like 14 fashion weeks by then, multiple fashion weeks, I mean, and I took a couple of seasons out. And you get a bit, towards the end, I was a bit jaded. I was turning into one of those fashion people that's like, oh, what a drag, I've got to go to Paris Fashion Week and sit on it, you know. And I resolved that I was never going to feel that way again. I was going to absolutely treat it really seriously, not get involved in all the gossip that just happens from downtime and people sitting next to each other that never wanted to be on holiday with each other, which is ultimately what it is. You know, it's like enforced holidays twice a year with people, you know. And of course they gossip about who's sitting over there. You see him, you know, you hear it all, and it's you know, vile by the end of 4 weeks, as you can imagine. So I think I just try and be myself. And I try not to dress up as the editor, you know. I'm the only woman in flat shoes on the front row of Tom Ford, you know, and that's actually, I mean, it sounds like a joke, but it's actually a very big political issue, you know. I try and have these kinds of conversations with my advertising relationships. It's the way I speak to editors, and it's the only way I know how, you know. Of course I could be media trained and have a big and bouncy, and, you know, I know what that's meant to look like, but I don't think that's what our magazine looks like. And I don't think that's who our reader is. And I think they need to, you know, we just need to recognise ourselves in it. Mm-hmm.
Do you think that threatens people, though? Do you think the fact that you're not playing the game in the way that a lot of other magazine editors are playing the game, do you think people take that as threatening?
Well, I sort of thought it was meant to be the opposite. Do you?
I think if there's a certain kind of rules and customs around a certain thing, and someone turns up kind of deliberately not adhering to them, that could come across as a threatening or as a statement.
Well, Well, I mean, I don't know if you've read any of there have been quite a lot of interviews with me in the magazines, and, you know, the introduction's often, you know, academic, you know, and it sort of makes me sound like I'm Brain of Britain. That can be a bit, you know, it's very, I'm sure, very flattering and whatever, but apart from it not being true, you know, it maybe makes, you know, I don't want to posit myself as the ex-museum curator coming into, you know, I'm clearly different from many editors, but they're not all the same either. And actually, anybody that's any good in this job ultimately doesn't look like what you think they look like either. The good stylists and the good editors, you know, they're in the studios working in their sweatshirt and their, you know, Birkenstocks. They're not sort of mincing around in high heels, you know, otherwise, you know. So, is my low-key persona intimidating? I doubt it, you know, because people that value that mode of appearing are probably so consumed with other people that look like them. I doubt they're even noticing me. Well, that's the way I prefer to think of it. I mean, maybe I'm being completely unrealistic. I don't know.
That's great. We're pretty much out of time. Just before you go, is there anything you can tell us about the next issue? Is there anything you can give us an exclusive?
We've got a controversial one. We've got a icon, Dutch icon. Say that. We've got one from a country that we've never done. No, we have done an interview with an amazing designer, and we've got a big hole in the cover at the moment. So come and tell me who it should be. Okay.
Well, that seems like a great place to leave it. My thanks to Penny Martin, everyone.
Thank you.